When the ideal family is preparing for the holiday, Victor receives a mysterious package that turns his life upside down. It contains a letter revealing a decades-long secret of betrayal. What is his wife hiding, and will Victor be able to forgive the past in order to save the family? Victor let out a frustrated sigh as he watched the breaking news on TV about a scandal involving a high-ranking army general and one of his aides, a married woman with 2 young children. The headline featured the now disgraced general addressing reporters, admitting that his actions had been morally wrong. He looked somber and noticeably more subdued than in earlier photographs with his aide, who had been implicated in the controversy. "It's funny how they all act remorseful and make apologies after they're exposed," Victor commented to his wife of over 30 years. He glanced at Vanessa as he spoke. They were sitting in their living room, catching up on the news after dinner, a routine that had been a comforting part of their lives for years. This quiet time together had been especially precious during the busy years of raising their children. Now both James and Karen were adults with their own families. James, 30, was an electrical engineer married to his childhood sweetheart with a 3-year-old daughter. Karen, 28, had married a colleague from work and had a 2-year-old son. Victor, 59, and Vanessa, a couple of years younger, shared a deep bond. Vanessa's dedication to fitness was evident in her active lifestyle and vibrant demeanor. Her brown hair, streaked with hints of white, framed her cheerful face, while her green eyes sparkled with energy. To Victor, she was not just a loving partner but a proud mother and grandmother. Though the years had passed, their connection remained strong. As they sat together, Victor turned his attention back to the television. The news shifted to a retired war veteran discussing the challenges faced by soldiers during prolonged deployments. He spoke about the isolation and the difficulties of being away from loved ones for extended periods. The veteran explained that these circumstances often strained relationships, creating vulnerabilities. "Do you think being away from family and the lack of companionship can justify poor decisions like this?" Victor asked, his tone contemplative. Vanessa seemed to reflect on the question for a moment. "We live in a complex society where relationships take many forms," she said thoughtfully. "In the end, it depends on the individuals involved and the circumstances they face. It's not really for us to judge what happens in someone else's personal life." Victor nodded, sensing her diplomatic tone. Her response left room for interpretation, but he appreciated her perspective. Relationships, he realized, were nuanced, shaped by unique challenges and choices. Victor didn't have much time to dwell on his wife's reply as Vanessa adjusted her position on the couch, her attention fixed on the TV screen. She was deeply engrossed in her favorite series, completely absorbed in the unfolding story. Victor smiled, amused by how captivated she was by the drama playing out before her. As the show continued, the atmosphere between them became more relaxed. Victor reached out to hold Vanessa's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. She leaned against him, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a while, enjoying the quiet intimacy of the moment. "Can you believe that twist?" Vanessa finally said, turning to face him with an expression of genuine surprise and excitement. Victor chuckled. "I didn't see it coming either. You always pick the most unpredictable shows." Vanessa laughed softly, the sound bringing warmth to the room. For a moment they simply looked at each other, their connection unspoken but clear. It was these quiet, shared moments that Victor cherished the most, reminders of the bond they had built over the years. The evening passed peacefully as they continued to watch the show together, their closeness a testament to their enduring partnership. The following morning, Victor departed early for his former company's office. A few years prior, he had stepped down from his role as vice president. His employer was reluctant to let him leave. Victor had dedicated over 2 decades to the company, starting as a site engineer and steadily climbing the ranks. However, Victor was resolute in his decision. He had first discussed his plans with Vanessa before bringing them to his employer. With their children securing jobs and starting their own families, Victor and Vanessa felt the need for more personal time to spend with their growing extended families. Vanessa also planned to resign within a couple of years. They ultimately agreed that Victor would remain connected to the company as a consultant. This arrangement was attractive to Victor because it allowed him to stay involved in the construction industry while his former employer could leverage his extensive expertise. According to their agreement, Victor would visit the office 2 to 3 times each week, unless urgent matters arose. This schedule provided him plenty of free time to enjoy his hobbies, particularly golf. Meanwhile, Vanessa held a senior position in the accounts department of a company that operated a chain of retail stores across the state. She had been with this company for the past 10 years, having joined when they relocated from Dallas to Houston following Victor's promotion, which required him to move to the head office. In reality, Vanessa's hard work at her previous job in Dallas and a commendatory letter from her former boss, Harry Woolman, had secured her the new position. Harry was well connected with the retail chain's owners, and when they decided to move to Houston, he reached out to them to help Vanessa obtain the job. Both Vanessa and Victor were grateful to Harry for his assistance. Back in Dallas, Vanessa had joined Harry's company once Karen was old enough to attend school, and remained there until their move to Houston, spanning nearly 14 years. The decision to relocate to Houston was relatively straightforward, as by that time both of their children had finished high school and were attending college. Given her long tenure with Harry's company, he went above and beyond to ensure she secured the new job. Victor often nostalgically remembered their years in Dallas, where both their children were born and raised. Occasionally, he wished they had chosen to retire there, but Vanessa was not interested. She reasoned that living in Houston kept them closer to their children and grandchildren, which was more important than holding on to fond memories of the past. Her philosophy was to focus on the present rather than dwell on bygone days. Victor had no reason to contest her viewpoint, and with the consultancy offer on the table, it seemed like a favorable decision. That evening, the primetime news provided additional updates on the disgraced general and his mistress. Observing the intense media frenzy surrounding the affair, it seemed to be the most significant event for the press industry since the tragic and sorrowful circumstances of Lady Diana's death. According to the newscaster, the woman involved had confided in her friends that she regretted the harm her affair had caused her family and others. "You know what?" Victor said to his wife as she handed him his glass of wine. "She claims she regrets hurting her family, but she hasn't expressed any remorse for the affair itself. How can a woman, or a man for that matter, be so driven and solely focused on climbing the corporate ladder? Did it never occur to her that she was being deceitful and betraying her husband's trust? How can you be so certain that this affair was purely about ambition and glamour?" Vanessa replied softly, taking a sip of her wine. Victor was taken aback by her response. He glared at his wife, who continued to watch the TV screen intently. "That woman isn't a naive 20-something. She's a fully mature 40-year-old. Are you saying she intentionally chose to leave her marriage? Do you think she developed feelings that should have been directed toward her husband and plunged into a passionate affair, disregarding her children and the impact it could have on their future upbringing?" Victor asked incredulously. The news channel was airing archival footage of a woman performing push-ups alongside the interviewer. This footage was taken around the time she had published a book about her lover, a biography of the general. At that point, the public had no idea that the general and the writer shared a deeper connection beyond professional discussions about the book. "Victor, men and women often perceive memories differently. Try to understand what I'm saying. If you ask women about their most cherished moments, they might mention a peaceful picnic or a quiet afternoon at a cafe on a rainy day. Meanwhile, men might focus on entirely different aspects of the same experience, she explained. For a moment, neither of them spoke as Victor processed her words. Vanessa then added, "While she was working on the biography, they spent a significant amount of time together, possibly developing a shared understanding, a blending of two minds." Victor frowned slightly. "And perhaps more than just minds," he muttered irritably. It seemed his wife was offering an explanation, if not a defense, for the pair's relationship. Vanessa pressed her lips together and turned her attention back to the TV. "That man is old enough to be a grandfather to her young children. He should have shown the restraint and maturity expected of someone in his position. Our leaders entrusted him with significant responsibilities. The least he could do was maintain appropriate boundaries," Victor said, his tone sharp and authoritative. Vanessa sighed softly. If only emotions could be as logical as our minds. Matters of the heart don't always follow reason," she said quietly. Victor was taken aback. He couldn't believe his wife was speaking this way. Her tone made it sound like she was narrating a scene from one of her melodramatic soap operas. "For the sake of her family and children, I hope her husband views this situation with more understanding than I would," he replied sharply. At those words, Victor noticed Vanessa sit up straighter, a subtle tension in her posture. He wondered if he had been too harsh. They had unknowingly taken opposing sides, he with the wronged spouse, and she with the woman at the center of the controversy. Victor reached for the remote and changed the channel, letting the conversation drift into silence. In the days that followed, Victor was too occupied to address the scandal involving the disgraced general and his married mistress. With Thanksgiving approaching, he and Vanessa were preparing to welcome their children and grandchildren, and Vanessa had provided him with an extensive list of tasks. There were items to purchase for the little ones, who seemed to maintain constant contact with their grandmother through their parents' mobile phones. Additionally, the valuable china needed to be carefully stored in the attic to ensure it was safe. The plan was to give their grandchildren plenty of space to play freely without accidentally breaking anything expensive. So engrossed in his duties, Victor decided to skip his golf session, unaware that this choice would forever alter his life. He spent the entire day wrapping the costly dinnerware in soft cloths and old newspapers, then placing them into cardboard boxes to be moved up to the attic. Once that was done, he began relocating some of the other fragile living room items to the garage. He didn't hear the doorbell the first time it rang because he was busy organizing the garage. By the time he returned to the main house, the courier was persistently pressing the doorbell. Victor quickly looked around before heading to the front door, still having many tasks to finish. "Are you the Browns?" the courier casually asked, clearly shifting his chewing gum from one side of his mouth to the other. "I have a package for you," he added, holding out a form for Victor to sign. "Kids these days really have no manners," Victor muttered as he forcefully closed the door. He placed the box on the kitchen table while checking the sender's information. It was addressed to V. Brown and came from a law firm in Dallas. The fact that it was sent by someone from their old hometown intrigued him. Perhaps, if he hadn't been so preoccupied, he would have realized that V. Brown could also stand for Vanessa Brown. Maybe he would have let Vanessa open the package after she returned from work. But things didn't unfold that way. Instead, Victor grabbed a kitchen knife and cut through the packing tape. Vanessa's car pulling into their driveway that evening disrupted the unnerving stillness that had enveloped the Brown household for several hours. This was followed by the sounds of her car door opening and then shutting. A short while later, Vanessa entered the home through the garage. "Hey, honey, I'm back," she called out as she started unloading a few shopping bags and a laptop bag she was carrying. "Wow, someone's been really active today," she added in a cheerful tone while looking around the messy living room. "Sweetheart, come downstairs and join me in the kitchen. I'm going to make some really hot coffee for us," Vanessa said, as she walked toward the kitchen. Her husband's lack of response up to that point didn't seem to bother her. "Hey, what do we have here?" Victor heard his wife remark. He gazed down through his red-rimmed glasses at the photocopied document he was holding in his now almost numb hands. Just recently his hands had been shaking uncontrollably. Victor clutched the paper as if his very life depended on it. He had organized the contents of the package exactly as he had discovered them, placing the letter from his wife's lover at the top. He realized that was what she must be reading at that moment. Putting on his reading glasses, Victor began to read the letter once more, fully aware that his wife was likely doing the same. "My dearest pretty petals, if you're holding this letter in your lovely hands and reading it, then I must tell you, my dear, that my time in this world has come to an end, and the Lord has called me to his heavenly abode. First and foremost, please don't be sad for me. I'm an elderly man in my 70s, or rather a lonely one since Martha passed away many years ago. Her departure has completely drained my enthusiasm for life. As you know, she was my childhood sweetheart, and we married when we were just 20 and 19. She stood by me through almost 40 years of good times and bad, as her health slowly declined. We both knew she was leaving, but until the very end, we held on to each other like teenagers, cherishing every precious moment we had together until it was finally time for her to go. So, as I mentioned, please don't mourn for me. It's time for me to be reunited with my Martha. My children are well established, and my grandchildren are ready to leave the nest, so my pretty petals bid farewell to this old man with a smile. If there is life after death, then it's time to start anew and find out where Martha is. And as for you, my pretty petals, if it weren't for your loving care and kindness during those terrible days after Martha left me alone and helpless, I would have long since passed away. Don't argue. I know that's the truth, and so do you. You took me into your care, comforting me like a mother would a grieving child. The warmth of your love and our closeness worked like a magic potion. You know, the truth is, I've always had a soft spot for you despite our age difference. Whether I was watching you at work or seeing you busy during your children's birthday parties, my affection for you was always strong. In many ways, you reminded me of my younger days when Martha and I were juggling life with our kids at home. Those special gestures and playful whispers that you and the other girls in the office would gossip and laugh about were truly meant for you alone. I mentioned those things to the other girls just to cover myself. It seemed to work, as whenever you all exchanged notes in the office, my playful side would surface, and you'd all dismiss it as an old man's forgetfulness. After I was left alone in this world, I discovered another side of you, a caring and loving side. Have you ever pondered the meaning behind the symbol of womanhood, a full circle with an equilateral cross? Let me explain. The circle represents spirit, and the cross stands for matter. You, my dear Vanessa, embody womanhood perfectly. You healed this deeply wounded soul, giving it a reason to live. If Martha is watching me write these final words to you, I'm sure she fully agrees. And the physical intimacy we shared? It was incredible. You were always so vibrant, full of energy and playful tricks. Even the Playboy models could learn a thing or two from you. In essence, you are the embodiment of womanhood, in spirit, mind, and certainly in body as well. May the Lord bless every moment of your life with happiness and good health. You love children, and I hope the Lord grants you many more of the adorable little ones. Well, pretty petals, it's quite a challenge to express my eternal gratitude to you. Let me get to the main reasons for writing this letter. The first reason, you've probably already guessed by looking at the stack of photos and CDs enclosed in the parcel. Yes, you're right. These are memories of our time together. Please forgive my voyeuristic tendencies, but you know me so well that you were likely already aware of them, even though you never mentioned it. I had cameras strategically placed in my office and home. But rest assured, I've never shared these memories of our time together with anyone, not even with some of the women I was friends with. And you requested that, so you're fully aware of them. With my end approaching, I couldn't bring myself to destroy them, so I'm sending them to you. Please keep them close to your heart forever, as I have kept them in mine. Now, for another matter. My dear, my lawyers will be reaching out to you soon regarding a check for $2 million made out to you. Do you remember our 2-day trip to Miami? We left the harbor and lived under the open blue sky. Sigh. That's one trip I wish I had brought my surveillance camera for. We went snorkeling and then spent the whole day making love on the open deck. Afterwards, we would prepare dinner, get intoxicated, and make love again in the living quarters. Those were wonderful moments we shared together. You might also recall that on the last day we visited an art gallery where you selected some portraits. Well, my pretty petals, those paintings are now valued at nearly $2 million, and I don't think I should leave that money to any of my children. I have instructed my lawyers to secure a fair price for them and transfer the full proceeds to you. If you'd like, you can provide your bank details to my attorney, and he will arrange an electronic transfer to your account. I believe I've covered everything I wanted to say. My dearest pretty petals, I wish you all the very best in life once again. Take care. Forever indebted to you, Peachy. The letter slipped from his grasp and settled gently at his feet. It revealed a shocking truth. His wife of over 30 years had been having an affair with her boss in Dallas, a revelation that blindsided him. As the memories of their life together resurfaced, one in particular stood out. Harry and Martha had always been the life of the party, known for their love of hosting grand events. At one such gathering, as the evening unfolded, Harry began searching for his wife. She wasn't in the living room or the kitchen, so he stepped outside to check the patio. There, in the dim light, he saw her speaking closely with her boss. They stood too close for comfort, and the sight left Harry uneasy. Unsure of what he had just witnessed, he tried to brush it off. Later, during their drive home, Harry mentioned his concerns. Vanessa dismissed his suspicions, teasing him for overthinking things. "Harry, you've always been the flirt at parties. Don't you think it's fair I get a little attention too?" she said with a wry smile. She assured him it was harmless, and Harry let it go for the moment. But now, as he sat alone with the letter, the doubts returned with full force. Memories of little things, her distant behavior, the unexplained trips to Dallas, began to connect like pieces of a puzzle. Harry knew he had to confront the truth, even if it meant facing the betrayal head-on. Yet deep down, he struggled with the question. Had their happy moments been genuine, or had they been overshadowed by secrets he'd never noticed? Martha had been diagnosed with liver cancer. Years of relentless partying had taken a toll on her health. The diagnosis came too late, and the cancer was already advanced. She passed away 6 months later. Her death had a profound impact on Harry. As far as Victor could recall, the parties at his house ceased altogether. By then, Harry's personal life had taken a different turn, and his demeanor changed significantly. For nearly a year, a secret weighed on Victor's chest. It wasn't until recently that he uncovered the painful truth. He felt a mix of betrayal and heartbreak, emotions that mirrored the story of the general's downfall, a man who had been betrayed by someone he trusted most. Victor's mind raced with questions. What was the general's wife thinking during her public humiliation? A woman who had stood by her husband's side for decades, supporting his endeavors and sacrifices, only to face such a bitter end. These thoughts resonated deeply with Victor as he reflected on his own life. At his age, he had expected a peaceful retirement, time spent with family, and the quiet joys of growing old together. Instead, he faced the harsh reality of betrayal, The realization was overwhelming, but he resolved to confront it head-on. As he sat in his study, lost in thought, he heard soft footsteps approaching. Quickly composing himself, Victor wiped his face and turned to face the door. Vanessa entered quietly, her expression a mixture of guilt and hesitation. She looked at him, then at the floor, as if searching for words that might bridge the chasm between them. The package. It was addressed to V. Brown and sent from Dallas, so I thought it was for me, Victor said calmly, breaking the silence. Vanessa hesitated, her makeup smeared from tears, her hair slightly disheveled. She sat in the chair opposite him, stealing occasional glances, but avoiding his gaze for long. The air between them was heavy, the weight of unspoken words pressing down. "Victor, I don't know how to explain this. It's not what you think," she stammered, her voice trembling. But Victor couldn't suppress the bitterness rising within him. He recalled the moments leading up to this confrontation, the suspicions, the signs he had ignored, and finally, the undeniable proof that had brought them to this moment. Betrayal wasn't a fleeting act. It lingered, leaving scars that no apology could heal. Vanessa spoke again, her voice faltering. "After Martha's passing, he changed. At the office, we noticed he wasn't himself. He was devastated, and we tried to support him, to help him cope." Victor listened, his emotions in turmoil. He knew the loss of Martha had affected Harry deeply, but the details Vanessa shared painted a picture of someone struggling to hold on. The office had rallied around him, offering support, but Harry's grief seemed insurmountable. "He wasn't present with us anymore," Vanessa continued. "We all tried to keep him occupied, to keep his mind off the pain, but it wasn't enough." Victor remained silent, processing her words. He understood grief. It was an all-consuming force, but it didn't justify the choices that had been made. In that moment, the weight of their shared history hung between them. Over 30 years of marriage, countless memories, and a family they had built together, all overshadowed by this betrayal. Vanessa's gaze returned to Victor, pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. But Victor wasn't ready to grant it, not yet. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for now, he resolved to face the truth with quiet strength. Victor gazed at his wife's unkempt face. Everything she had just mentioned was something he was vaguely aware of during that period, but he couldn't see how it was connected to her involvement in the affair. That was the time when some of the company's top executives held a brief meeting with Harry. They decided that he would have a company aide present during these crucial client meetings, Vanessa explained. She paused to gauge her husband's reaction. Victor looked back at her with a puzzled expression, curious about where she was leading this conversation. "I was chosen to be Harry's aide," Vanessa continued. As she spoke, she gave Victor a look that was both defensive and defiant. Victor leaned in, his interest piqued. "I made it my responsibility to ensure Harry received all the necessary information from every department for upcoming meetings. This involved extensive networking with department heads and their teams, as well as gaining an understanding of each department's operations. By then, Harry was becoming increasingly engaged, which was a positive development for us. He began mentoring me on how different departments functioned and the key parameters I needed to monitor and enforce. Gradually, things started to fall into place, and the business began to thrive. We became a cohesive team. I started attending all client meetings with him, even those out of town," she continued, casting a cautious glance at her husband when mentioning the out-of-town meetings. At this point, Victor started to grasp some of the situation, but chose not to interrupt, allowing his wife to share her side of the story. Eventually, I effectively took on the role of his primary advisor. The business improved, and we successfully halted the decline in sales. Additionally, I made it my responsibility to ensure he didn't miss his medications. Everyone could see how much he depended on me, and it made me proud to have helped steer the company away from the edge of disaster, Vanessa concluded, a barely hidden sense of pride on her face and a distant look in her eyes as she reminisced about the past. Victor continued to observe his wife, this time with a sharper focus. The anger threatened to disrupt his composed demeanor once more, and a tightness returned to his chest. His analytical, detail-oriented mind had already pieced together much of the situation, staying several steps ahead even as emotions swirled within him. "So you aligned yourself with him completely," he remarked with a sharp tone, recalling how the press had often sensationalized the former general's relationships. Vanessa stiffened as though struck, her face flushing with a mix of frustration and defensiveness. "Don't twist things to insult me," she shot back, crossing her arms tightly and taking a deep breath to steady herself. Victor observed her reaction with a hint of detachment, now questioning her perspective on the choices she had made. "Insult you? That's hardly my intention," he said with a dry chuckle. "If anything, I'm just trying to make sense of it all." A tense silence hung between them until Vanessa finally broke it. "I wasn't what you're implying," she said firmly. "Then explain," Victor replied, his voice low but resolute. Vanessa hesitated briefly before continuing. "As I said, Harry became increasingly reliant on me. From the moment he entered the office until the moment he left, we were constantly working together. That dynamic also helped me sharpen my negotiation skills, as I observed his techniques and occasionally sought his guidance." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. Victor could sense that something deeper was coming. But Harry struggled to find peace within himself. Occasionally, during out-of-town trips when we dined in hotel restaurants, I'd notice him watching couples at nearby tables with a wistful look. He seemed lost in thought, burdened by something unspoken. Once, during a formal event, we found ourselves on the dance floor. While we were dancing, I realized he was unusually distracted, staring at a couple across the room with that same forlorn expression. He hadn't even realized how close we were standing. She spoke quickly, as though getting the words out before she lost her nerve. Victor listened, his mind turning over every detail, preparing for whatever revelation was still to come. There was a short pause. Victor noticed his wife gathering the strength to continue. "Go on," he remarked tersely. "Well, when we got back to my room, I invited him in for a drink, and that's when everything changed," she concluded, avoiding her husband's gaze. By this point, Victor's feelings of betrayal and humiliation had turned into anger. If his suspicions were correct, that was the beginning of something inappropriate. He thought back to the patterns he had observed before, where others had claimed that their relationship started innocently, but later unraveled into something deeper. "So that's when it started," Victor stated, his tone sharp and loaded with sarcasm. "No, Victor, please believe me. I never stopped loving you," she retorted. It was more like seeking comfort, trying to heal my broken spirit." Victor's unease deepened. The way she spoke made him feel as though he never truly understood the woman he had been married to for over 30 years. He was starting to realize the depth of the emotional distance between them. He braced himself, knowing what she might say next. Whatever had happened that night marked the beginning of a bond that went far beyond a fleeting mistake. Yet his wife, a seasoned professional with decades of experience and poise, seemed to evade the full truth. What had really happened in that room? After some time talking about everything and nothing at all, I leaned in and kissed him. He seemed startled but then responded, Vanessa admitted, her voice trembling. We were both vulnerable, and in that moment, I let my guard down. Victor clenched his fists, struggling to process her words. He told me things I hadn't heard in years. He complimented me, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a moment of weakness, Victor. I wish I could undo it, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Victor remained silent, grappling with the weight of her confession. Her words painted a picture of betrayal, yet it was her attempt to rationalize it that struck him most. She had crossed a line, one that could never be undone. Would the general's own story mirror this? Would his actions be justified by fleeting emotions, or would they crumble under scrutiny? As Victor stared at his wife, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything familiar to him had been irrevocably changed. The next morning, a refreshed and revitalized Harry greeted me warmly at breakfast. He seemed more like the Harry I remembered from earlier days, full of energy and life. Though the events of the previous evening lingered in my mind, we avoided any direct mention of them. His bright demeanor and engaging presence reassured me that I had made the right decision. Right choice. Of course, you didn't think to consult me, did you? Or maybe you thought I'd wholeheartedly endorse your approach to helping your boss recover. Victor interjected, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Vanessa glanced at her husband, her expression unreadable, and continued speaking. The following days at the office went smoothly. Harry's mood and energy had significantly improved, and I felt genuinely happy about it. We worked closely together, often sharing lunch in his office. Over time, our professional bond grew stronger, and I noticed Harry returning to his old, confident self. Victor couldn't contain his skepticism. So, you're saying everything was fine, and your professional lunches were nothing more than that? He asked sharply. Vanessa hesitated, but eventually responded, choosing her words carefully. Victor, the truth is, Harry endured a terrible loss, and I was just trying to help him move forward. I didn't realize how it might look from the outside. Victor's expression hardened as he processed her words. You didn't realize? He repeated bitterly. Vanessa, 30 years of marriage, and now I'm seeing a side of you I never expected. Vanessa looked away, visibly emotional. Victor, I'm sorry for the hurt I've caused you. If I had known how things would spiral out of control, I regret everything that brought us to this point, she said softly, her voice breaking. Victor studied her closely, searching for sincerity in her words. He had always believed in their bond, their understanding of one another. But now doubts clouded his mind. Why had she betrayed him? Was it something lacking in their relationship, or was it something entirely different? I just want the truth, Victor said finally. When did all of this really start? Vanessa took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. It wasn't intentional, she began. When I started working closely with Harry, it was purely professional. But over time, as we spent more time together, I guess lines got blurred. I made mistakes, Victor. I should have been more mindful. Victor nodded slowly, his emotions a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. You should have been, he said quietly. But now I need to know, was it worth it? Vanessa looked down, unable to answer. Her silence was more telling than words could ever be. But the scene wasn't over, and the tension between the two lingered. The recording showed Harry looking at his wife with a conflicted expression. Martha would have never approved of this, he murmured. Victor felt a chill run through him. The man was speaking in a way that dishonored the memory of his late wife. Even more unsettling was the affectionate way his wife, Vanessa, smiled back at her companion, as if basking in the moment. Then Victor heard his wife speak, her tone both tender and resolute. You've always known how to make me feel alive. She sat beside him by the pool, their connection undeniable. As the video continued, Victor observed the two sharing quiet laughter, their bond apparent. It wasn't just the physical closeness that stung, It was the intimacy, the emotional connection he once thought was exclusively theirs. Harry brushed a strand of hair from Vanessa's face, his expression soft yet intense. Victor's heart sank further as he continued to watch. His wife leaned in to whisper something inaudible, her body language conveying trust and vulnerability. The two seemed lost in their own world, unaware of the camera capturing their interactions. Later in the recording, Vanessa sat alone, her gaze distant and pensive. She seemed to be reflecting on something, perhaps the weight of her actions. Her silence was eventually broken when Harry approached, sitting beside her and holding her hand. The gesture was tender, but it made Victor's pain even more profound. The confrontation that followed was no less intense. "Tell me, Vanessa," Victor said, his voice trembling with anger and sorrow. "How long has this been going on?" Vanessa's eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand, shock and shame evident on her face. "I'm sorry, Victor. I didn't mean for it to—" "Save it," Victor interrupted. "Years of trust, gone in an instant. You really expect me to believe this just happened out of nowhere?" Vanessa struggled to meet his gaze. Her voice faltered as she tried to explain. "After Martha passed, Harry was lost. I thought I was helping him. I didn't think it would go this far." Victor shook his head, his voice laced with bitterness. "Helping him? By betraying me? Vanessa, you had a choice, and you chose to shatter everything we built." Vanessa looked down, tears forming in her eyes. "I've always loved you, Victor. What happened between me and Harry? It wasn't about love. It was complicated." Victor's expression hardened. "Complicated? That's the excuse you're giving me? You chose to be there for him instead of being there for me. That's the only thing that's clear." Vanessa's tears fell silently as Victor turned away. The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air. Without another word, Victor stormed out of the room, grabbing his belongings and heading to the guest room, leaving Vanessa to sit alone with her thoughts. That night, he couldn't sleep. The confrontation with his wife about her questionable relationship had revealed startling truths and insights into her character that left him unsettled. During their argument, she insisted it wasn't what it seemed, but rather something she claimed was therapeutic, and that he had always been and would remain her true partner. What kind of explanation was that? Or was this just a way to justify her actions? Victor couldn't help but wonder if others in similar situations offered the same justifications. Could the general's close acquaintance have been saying something similar to her unsuspecting husband? Perhaps she had argued that her actions were motivated by sympathy for the general's loneliness, or a sense of duty to support someone under pressure. But why should anyone believe such reasoning? After all, the truth had only come to light because of a government investigation that uncovered connections unrelated to their personal lives. Up until then, everything had been kept quiet. Similarly, Victor reflected that if he hadn't opened the courier package, he might never have discovered the extent of his wife's involvement with her boss. Even the most carefully hidden secrets can eventually unravel, Victor thought bitterly. Vanessa knocked on the guest room door, asking if he had taken his medication. Victor sighed and turned his back, unwilling to respond. Despite her insistence on helping him, he didn't feel the need for her reminders. He could manage on his own. After a few moments, the knocking stopped, and she left. A flicker of guilt crossed his mind. Vanessa had always been attentive about his health, and part of him felt he might be acting unfairly. "Thank goodness the kids are grown and out of the house," was one of the last thoughts that crossed his weary mind before sleep finally came. In the ensuing days, they avoided each other. Victor was still trying to fully comprehend that his wife had been unfaithful. What was even more exasperating was her apparent indifference to the situation. It seemed she believed she had done what was necessary, and that they should move forward with their lives. With Thanksgiving approaching, their children and grandchildren would soon be arriving, and there were numerous preparations still to be made. They had silently agreed to maintain peace until the children had left. Victor carried out his daily tasks while minimizing conversations with his wife as much as possible. Vanessa appeared to understand the need for distance and silence, yet her eyes were often red and watery, and her face had taken on a consistently pale and unwell appearance. Several times he noticed her glancing his way. They had indeed stopped watching the post-dinner TV news. This might have been the first immediate consequence of her affair from many years ago. His wife noticed this change, too, as after meals he would now go straight to the guest room while Vanessa remained in the kitchen for an extended period with a drink in hand. He wondered how the cuckolded doctor and his unfaithful wife were faring. Was he now also confined to the guest room, especially since the entire world knew that the general had taken his side of the bed for himself? A day before the children were set to return home, Vanessa urged Victor to move back into the master bedroom. Victor initially refused, but eventually agreed. He couldn't see the point in having his humiliation and being labeled a cuckold exposed in front of his adult children and their spouses. It would only lead to more trouble. When the kids finally came home, all the bitterness was temporarily forgotten or put aside. He hadn't seen his children for nearly 6 months, and their return was a welcome relief. It was even more heartwarming to hear and watch the grandchildren running around. Karen was the first to notice the change in her mother. It's remarkable how girls can detect even the slightest shifts in attitude and behavior. "Mom, you don't seem like your usual lively self. I hope you're keeping up with your medical checkups," she said, her voice filled with concern. Karen had always been caring by nature. She was quick to sense the underlying emotions. "Hey, Dad, I hope you two haven't been arguing over something like little kids," she added. Although it was meant as a light-hearted comment, Vanessa immediately straightened up and glanced over her daughter's shoulder, looking startled as if caught in headlights. "Hey, look!" "It's that cuckold and the general's mistress," James shouted. He had been fixated on the TV and hadn't been paying attention to his sister's conversation. Victor was now shocked. Until then, he was the only one using the term cuck in the house. Hearing his own son say it made him momentarily lose control. Victor turned to see that his son had been watching the news. The news channel was featuring the cuckolded doctor and his unfaithful wife walking together along a gravel path at their friend's house, where they had planned to spend their Thanksgiving holiday. The woman wore dark sunglasses and had her coat collar turned up, likely to protect herself from the cold and intrusive cameras. Victor remembered seeing her before on the same channel, in more fashionable dresses. The fine lines around her mouth were clearly visible. Cheating was one thing, but being exposed by the global media was another. Victor glanced at his wife out of the corner of his eye. She was standing in exactly the same spot he had seen her a few moments earlier. It seemed as though she was frozen in place. Her face had regained a deathly pallor, and the pain in his chest returned. The painful memories of the past few days, and the harsh images of his wife's infidelity from the photos and CD, sent to her by her lover as a final gesture, flooded back. Why? Why, God damn it? Why did she betray her family? After taking her marriage vows and starting a family, did she not realize that her life was no longer solely hers, just as his life was no longer solely his? Why, God damn it. However, it appeared that she wasn't an exceptional woman. The woman featured on the TV news seemed to come from her social circle. Her husband had a calm and professional demeanor, a doctor dedicated to saving lives. It was unfortunate that his wife seemed drawn to a different kind of personality, someone whose choices had recently disrupted their family dynamic, affecting 2 innocent children who were too young to understand the complexities of adult decisions. "Oh, those children are just adorable," Karen said, her maternal instincts evident. Just one glance at that disheveled man, and you can almost see why his wife might have been drawn to someone more dynamic, James remarked while engrossed in the news. Come on, James. We don't know the full story. Maybe she felt that the general, someone entrusted with an important mission in a challenging region, needed the emotional support of a close companion. Victor interjected, his tone measured. Perhaps she believed she was doing the right thing by offering her support, even if it came at the cost of her marriage. We can't say for certain what drove her decisions. Right, but the doctor has endured enough already, James retorted. It's clear she's ambitious and prioritizes her own desires over her family. If the doctor is wise, he'll focus on moving forward, ensuring his children are in a stable and loving environment. He deserves better than this, and it's time he builds a life free from betrayal. Victor nodded thoughtfully while Karen remained silent, reflecting on the complexity of human relationships. Victor thought, "Same here." He briefly glanced at his wife, who remained frozen, clutching the back of a chair as if her life depended on it. Perhaps she was stunned by their son's intense outburst. Her pupils flickered nervously from one family member to another before returning to Victor. Karen reasoned, maybe she developed feelings for the general over their many years of interaction. She's undoubtedly a strong and ambitious woman, evident from her high school and West Point records that the press has diligently uncovered for their readers. Perhaps through her ongoing interactions with the general, she began to see him as her ideal man. Victor noticed that Karen seemed to share her mother's perspective. Did all women think the same way? "No way, Karen," interjected Janet, Victor's daughter-in-law, who had just joined them after checking on the children. "She is committed to her marriage and has her own family. Even if she developed feelings for another man, she shouldn't have crossed that invisible line. She selfishly broke the trust her family placed in her. In a way, she has already abandoned them and moved on to her personal life, leaving little room for her family and certainly nothing for the father of her children. The family needs to move on as well," Janet continued. Victor thought, good for her. At least there was one woman in the house who disagreed. His son was fortunate to have Janet as a life partner. His daughter-in-law was sensible. Now it was 2 against 1. Victor turned to his wife. "Well, dear, what's your take? Was it an affair of the heart that should have been acted upon as Karen believes, or should it have remained just an emotional affair, like Janet suggests?" Everyone in the room looked towards her. She stood with wide eyes, trembling lips, and an open mouth forming a small O. Essentially, she resembled a hunted animal cornered with guns pointed at her. "Just leave them alone," she finally shouted, completely surprising everyone. By then, tears were streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "What does it matter what they do or don't do?" she continued in a shaky voice. She was visibly trembling, and the dim room light cast strange shadows across her face. "Mother!" Karen exclaimed in alarm. She tried to approach her mother, but Vanessa raised an arm to stop her, and then quickly walked away, leaving everyone stunned. Karen's husband, Dave, entered from the patio. He had been on his phone the entire time and missed the family drama. "Hey, I heard loud voices. What's going on?" he asked, puzzled. "Nothing, Dave. I hope nothing," Karen replied softly, still looking at the door through which her mother had just left hastily. Her maternal instincts were fully alert, sensing something was wrong. She then looked at her father with an unspoken question in her eyes. Victor maintained a neutral expression and shrugged. The next day, there was no mention of the general and his concubine or of Vanessa's near breakdown. The children, their spouses and children, said their goodbyes, and by late afternoon, only Victor and Vanessa were left together. In another time, they might have ended up neck-deep in the bathtub sharing a glass of wine. But now there was nothing to share except more awkward questions and denials. Vanessa's eyes were swollen, red, and had noticeable bags underneath. It had been under 2 weeks since the courier had shown up, and she appeared to have lost some weight as well. However, Victor remained puzzled by her continued attitude. With little else to distract him, Victor retrieved a bottle of his favorite whiskey and poured himself a generous glass. By late afternoon, the bottle was nearly empty beside him on the couch. He sat there, staring blankly at the TV through his intoxicated haze. Vanessa was in the room too, wearing a disapproving expression, but she wisely remained silent. Victor was indifferent to her approval of his drinking, especially since she hadn't consulted him before getting involved with her boss. The news was displaying images of the general's wife's lover taken in a remote, underdeveloped Asian country. She had a scarf draped over her head to conceal her hair and was surrounded by a group of cheerful local children. Victor found this amusing. "Why is she covering her hair with a scarf?" he slurred. "According to that country's social norms, a woman must keep her head covered, and that's what she's doing," Vanessa responded, relieved that her husband had at least addressed her directly. "And why was she sleeping with the general there? Is that some sort of social norm in that country?" Victor continued, clearly drunk. "I wish I could answer all your questions," Vanessa whispered after a moment of reflection. "And please tell me what social norm in our great country compelled you to share yourself with your boss to drag him back from the land of the dead." Victor shouted drunkenly, his voice filled with the anguish of betrayal. Vanessa looked at her husband with wide eyes, tears already streaming from her reddened eyes. "Victor, I'm sorry for the pain and suffering I've caused you. If I could turn back time and make things right, I would. But Victor, we need to move forward. And I believe we can do it," Vanessa said, now kneeling in front of him with her hands resting on his thighs. "Move forward? Us? What lies ahead that makes you sound so incredibly optimistic?" Victor grumbled. "Sweetheart, we've spent our entire lives together. We have 2 wonderful children as evidence of our love, and now we have grandchildren too. It's like we nurtured a young tree, watered it, fertilized it, and watched it grow. Now that tree is tall and sturdy, bearing fruit, the fruits of our labor. Just imagine everything that awaits us. In a way, our lives are just beginning. Some of my past actions seem to have deeply hurt you. But Victor, what if I had fallen into bad company and become a prohibited substances addict? Wouldn't you have tried to hold on to me and move forward together?" Victor's alcohol-fogged mind struggled to respond. If his wife had become a prohibited substances addict, what would he have done? Yelled at her, ranted, or attempted to help her overcome her addiction and return to normal? And so, was she addicted to intimacy? Did she yearn for something new? Was that what she was implying? "So you admit you're a intimacy-starved nymphomaniac. How many men have been in your life besides me and good old Harry?" "Victor, there's been no other man in my life except you," Vanessa retorted. "And I'm not a intimacy-crazed nymphomaniac. You know me well enough, and should have thought twice before making such a baseless accusation," she continued, her voice tinged with anger. "That's exactly the issue," Victor responded. "The photos show you having intimacy with your boss. You yourself admitted to having an affair with your boss, yet you still claim there's been no one else in your life besides me." "Victor, I only used my body to help a suffering and grieving person. I believe I deserve better judgment than what you're giving me." "I think I need some fresh air," Victor said, frustrated. He stood up, stumbled into the guest room, and collapsed face down on the bed. The next morning, Victor woke up early with a splitting headache. His unsettled stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten much the night before. He was surprised to see Vanessa asleep in the easy chair by his bed. Memories of their argument from the previous night resurfaced, making him feel nauseous. Yes, he needed fresh air. In fact, He needed to be alone with his thoughts to determine the best way forward. He looked again at his wife's sleeping figure. The empty glass on the table beside her chair indicated she would be out for a while. Victor quickly packed some clothes and essentials into a duffel bag and quietly left the house. He decided to stay at their cabin by the lake for a few days. He deserved a break. He left a note in the kitchen for Vanessa, informing her of where he was going.